I'm here today with my friend Jacob Hole. I have known Jacob probably longer than anyone else that I'll probably have on this podcast. Um, he's known me probably as long as I've been alive,
Yeah.
and I've known him since I can remember knowing people. So it's been a while. So we've known each other for a while, but the reason I'm having Jake on here is because I've seen him grow in so many cool ways in the company that he's with. Tell us a little bit about what you do and where you work.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me, and
Yeah,
I
for sure.
feel uh, privileged to just be able to participate in this with you.
Yeah, it's
So
fun.
it'll be cool. I work at a company currently called Carpenter Technology, and they're here in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
They make steel,
Hmm.
um, uh, really high end quality steel. So like they target very specific niche markets.
Hmm.
Um, It's
Like what?
all mostly stainless steel, and it's for applications with everything across the board. So they have
Hmm.
stuff in aerospace, they have stuff in automotive, they have stuff in medical,
Hmm.
um, they have stuff in knife blades, they have stuff in iPhones. I mean, everything you could think of. They
Yeah.
touch a lot of different categories.
Hmm.
So my job specifically there is in a quality control capacity. I supervise a group of 25 guys, and we're in charge of checking the quality of the metal as it goes through. So, yeah.
Hmm. That's pretty awesome. And you didn't start out in that position.
Mm-mm.
You started going to BCTC, right?
Mm-hmm.
You went to Votech. And
Yep.
how was that kind of like, what position did you start at in Carpenter? Uh, and what was the process of growing up into the position that you're in now?
Yeah. So, um, started started working for Carpenter when I was 19. I was working for one company right out of high school.
Hmm.
Um, Not that far from Carpenter, but they paid for me to go to evening classes
Hmm.
to get certified as a machinist in
Hmm.
the state of Pennsylvania through the labor department. They, while I was going to the school there, I met some people who were also going to school who were working at Carpenter Technology,
Hmm.
and they were like, "Hey, there's a job opening here." And as soon as I was like, "Oh, well, Carpenter," like I knew about it. It was
Yeah.
a very well known company. It's kind of the unspoken, like if you got an in there, like stay there, like that's a place you can actually have a career for 30 years or whatever,
Yep.
which is a downward trending phenomenon in our society. Is you
Hmm.
don't usually stick around in a company for 30 years and
Yeah.
make a full career out of it.
Uh-huh. It's kind of like make your way up through
Hmm.
switching jobs instead of like
Yeah.
you kind of made your way up in the company, which, like you said, is not as common nowadays.
Yeah. So I started as a machinist on the floor in the same department I'm working in. So I haven't left the department that I'm in,
Hmm.
um, uh, up until this point. It may or may not happen where I could be in a different department, but started as a machinist, worked at that on an off shift. So it wasn't as ideal. Like everybody
Yeah.
wants day shift. Like
Yep.
sometimes you have to bite the bullet and
Hmm.
you work off shift. So I did that for 3 years and then got a day shift working as a saw operator just because that position opened up. So
Hmm.
that gave me some good exposure to other areas of the shop, um, more well-rounded experience in the shop and as a whole. So
Hmm.
that definitely benefited me.
As a whole.
Yeah, as a
Jacob
whole.
Hole.
um, so
Oh man.
uh,
I'm sure those get old very
yeah,
fast.
no, it's fine. I actually enjoy 'em. It's a name you can dig. So
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go.
Um, so
As a whole.
yeah, as a whole. But no, working in the saw area then expanded my knowledge of the whole process
Uh-huh.
in the quality control. Um, so after being in that position for another like 3 or so years, a supervisor position opened up, or not a supervisor, but a group leader position, which is like a
Hmm.
mini supervisor. But
Hmm.
they they I wasn't their first pick.
Okay.
So there's like 3 or 4 people who were interested in taking that group leader,
Mhm.
and they wanted to give it to one other individual first. So that was humbling in and of itself, where you're
Yeah.
like, okay, I can accept that. I'm not as experienced maybe or as mature as some of these
Mhm.
other candidates, but um, they did like my interview when I interviewed for the position, and they're like, they did feel comfortable giving it to me. It's just it's I like to know that I wasn't their first pick, and I have to be okay with that,
Yeah.
and take that for what it's worth.
Did
But
that kind of push you to like keep growing in that, or was that
sure,
yeah?
yeah, like maybe to prove yourself a little bit, or just like feel like, all right, like I'm gonna do the best I can in this job now that I was
Mhm.
given this opportunity,
Yeah.
for sure. Taking that position for 4 years, it was understood that this would be a very, very demanding position. You
Mhm.
have 20 some people under you who you're the guy who has to figure things out instead of
Yeah.
I have a problem and I go to this guy to figure it out. Now
Mhm.
I'm the guy.
That's a big step.
It was very interesting dynamics with that shift where I never thought about work when I was at home
Uh-huh.
before.
Yeah.
I could go home and not think about it, and now I'm in a position where I get home and I sit at the couch or I sit in bed, and sometimes I'm like thinking about I got to do this tomorrow, and like communicating with people who are on the off shift,
Mhm.
you know, while I'm at home.
Mhm.
So that was challenging,
For sure.
just with that work life balance, definitely
Yeah.
challenging. And thankfully, with my wife Desiree
Mhm.
being the woman that she is, she was definitely behind me in that, because I said to her straight out, I was like, if I'm going to take this position, this is what it looks like. And we have to be okay with that,
Mhm.
because that's going to make it or break it for me, because I'm not going to want to do it if it's going to be an issue all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
And at this time, as we record this, you have 3 kids.
yep.
You have a wife. At that time when you were taking on that position, did you have any kids yet? Was it just you and your wife, or?
At that time, we had 2 kids.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So that
And
was a big.
yeah.
That was a big change.
Yep. And so the point that I tried to look at everything in was that there's instant gratification and there's delayed gratification, and I
Mhm.
knew if I was in this position it could lead to another position down the line potentially,
Mhm.
if we're willing to sacrifice and make decisions that are not easy decisions to
Yeah.
benefit in the later term.
Mhm.
And in the last year and a half I accepted a promotion to supervisor of that department. So that in and of itself was such a relief and an ease on some of the work life balance
Yeah.
that it felt worth it.
Uh huh.
Definitely,
For
like
sure.
it was like a breath of fresh air.
Mhm.
Like there's a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. Not that it didn't bring other challenges with it
Yeah.
taking that position, but the work life balance definitely improved.
Mhm.
So that was nice. But
Yeah, that's cool. So there was some really harder decisions that you had to make, even as a father, as a
mhm.
husband, um, and as someone who's involved with your church and with all the
Yeah.
different things that you're involved with, to even sacrifice Sundays and things like that, where
hmm
you'd have to work on Sundays and things like that. Where, um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that was an interesting point too, because until I took a group leader position, I worked one Sunday out of my entire 5 years that I worked there up until that point, or 5 or 6 years, whatever it was. And I always had the mindset of, if I could have a Sunday off and work 6 days a week and do it well and do it
mm-hmm,
like get it done type of a thing and get out of there and have a Sunday, that was my ideal. And I was very involved with the church, and that was a motivating factor to do that,
mm-hmm,
just as well as to be with my family doing that.
yeah,
There's that unspoken thing like you shouldn't work on a Sunday, or you shouldn't work on this day of the week or that day of the week, whatever your
Sabbath day, yeah,
Sabbath day recognition is or whatever.
uh-huh,
Um, so to me, it was a very difficult decision to think that one through. Like, how do I actually feel about working on a Sunday?
mm-hmm,
Because some people get very legalistic about it, and some people are very open to that it's not a hard rule,
Yeah.
there's two sides to that, and that was an interesting thing to think through. I guess my position that I took on it was something kind of that Mike Romanoff had said, who was um, a big influence in my life going through this period, especially. But he would say that he would go to car shows on a Sunday. And he'd be like, I'm going to church and I'm going to talk with my friends and hang out with my friends because this is where I'm going to see them and meet them and hang out with them and be able to engage with them. And so there's some aspect of that went through my head. Like it felt up until that point, like I never had to make that decision. So it wasn't a decision I never worried about making because I didn't have to make that decision. I definitely I would go to work and I would tend to leave and go directly to church and finish out the rest of the day at church. And we'd have our small group Bible meeting in the evening on the same day. So it's not like I still wasn't able to.
In churchy terms, you weren't abandoning the assembly.
Yeah, in churchy terms. Yeah. It wasn't like I was doing that. And I definitely had conversations briefly with like my pastor or Pastor Ted. And he was totally fine with it. And that made me feel comfortable with the fact that I'm doing this for my family to provide. And I'm doing this not in a way that I'm trying to fall into just a trap where I'm not participating in my church. Like he was encouraging in that, like he'd say stuff like, I could see you're working hard, Jake, like, and your family's blah, 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 or whatever he would say like that.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, and I think sometimes church can be like we can put such an emphasis on Sunday morning, and I think there's an importance. Like I hold a high importance for the big community service because I think it has a benefit and an importance to see that we're in this together and to see everybody. But it really is in the small group times where you even have that deeper discipleship and that deeper time. So I think some people might be in a season like you were in where they're like, I might not have the luxury to have Sunday off. Maybe I can have Saturday or Monday or Tuesday, some other random day that I can kind of rest, reflect, spend time with the Lord. But I don't have that Sunday morning or that capability to take off Sunday morning just because of a life circumstance or a job that they have to take on. And I think there's benefit in taking a season and allowing God to bring you through it. The Bible says that Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. That there's kind of that God gives it to us for a reason because He wants us to rest and He wants us to recharge. But at the same time, there's this to just set aside a day that's holy for Him. And like for me, Monday is my Sabbath day because Sunday, a lot of times I'm serving in the mornings. Like at my church has 3 services, and so you get there at 6:45 in the morning for practice, and then you leave in the afternoon, and that's half your day. So that's not very restful. No, so I didn't find Sunday to be my day of rest. It was more, on those days I'm serving, I'm really putting out a lot of effort, and then, but I've found that even Jake is my small group leader. I go to Jake's house pretty much any Sunday night I can. Yeah. And it's not because I feel obligated to go to Jake's house. It's not just so I can buy some eggs.
Which we'll
talk about that later.
Which we forgot to give you last time.
Jake, oh yeah, I forgot to get some eggs. Jake has a lot of hobbies, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's because I know that there's people that care about me, and if I need something, they're going to have my back. And if they need something, I can have their back. And that's just kind of a side tangent of how important the body of Christ is. And I think kind of that's coming out of your conversation about having to work on a Sunday and having
Yeah.
to, but you're still involved. You're still
Right.
spending time with Christians and spending time with people, and I think that's super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now there were some other times in your uh, like through COVID and stuff like that. There was some shutdowns. You weren't able to work as much,
Yeah.
and you had to take on some other stuff. How
Yeah.
was that? Because that was another kind of, I would say, if you would say, that's kind of a struggle time
Yeah.
where it
Absolutely.
was, as a husband, you had to take on another responsibility. Talk about that time too.
Yeah. So during COVID, well,
All the
so
shutdowns. Yeah.
I love telling this story because it's so crazy, but like we went down to Disney World. It was the
Mm-hmm.
last minute. We had like 2 months that we prepared, and some people take year-long time periods to prepare for Disney.
Yeah.
So I had gotten a bonus that January
Uh-huh.
of 2020. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like looking for something to do because I wanted to do something with the family. So like I suggested it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Desiree was like, sure, let's do it. So she was
Yeah.
game with it. So,
Because if anyone's met your daughters, they are Disney
yeah,
fanatics.
yeah, they are. Yep. Um,
So you had this idea.
princess
Yeah.
outfits all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mostly for them.
Yeah, not for me. I get makeup every now and then.
There you go.
But so I had this idea. We made it happen in like 2 months of planning,
Wow.
which was interesting.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't bad. And then we go down there. Desiree's pregnant with our third child.
Mm-hmm.
So we go down there, and a week into it, or no, it was a week long.
Mm-hmm.
Halfway through it, they started closing down the different parks because of COVID. So nobody talked about COVID until like January, February of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We were in March of 2020,
Yeah.
and it was the week that we were down there, Disney closed it down. So we left. We lost like 3 days of that
Oh man.
of that trip. So coming back from that, I just like telling that story because it was wild to be down in Disney
for
as they're
sure.
closing stuff down. You feel like the world is coming to an end.
Yeah.
And it was
Disney's-
very,
even
very
Disney's
weird. Yeah.
closing.
Yeah. So, but we got back, and all the same conversations are happening here.
Mm-hmm.
The company I was working for, we ultimately had to let go of, in our department, it was like 30% of our employees. So there's a big cut that we took. 30 to 40% of our employees had to be cut out of the workforce just in our department, which mostly was due to a decrease in work. But then eventually the work increased, and that caused other issues when we had to get more manpower then
Mm-hmm.
months later, year later. But during that time, they had to cut hours then too, on top of that. So I had to pick up a second job.
Mm-hmm.
That was the decision that Desiree and I made. Desiree was going to stay home with the child that we just had in June of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't an option really for her to go to work and for
Yeah.
me to go to work. It was stay home with the kid. It was very difficult because for her, she had to stay home with an infant most of the day, if not all of the day, on the days that I'd work my day job, and then an afternoon job at Tractor Supply was the job that I got part-time work at.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a struggle, but it was like a very difficult decision to make to make ends meet.
Especially after a big expensive vacation.
Yeah,
And then you're
yeah.
like, oh wow, this is not ideal.
We got the comments like, "Oh, don't you wish you had that money from Disney?" I was like, "Yeah, kind of do, but
Yeah.
who knew, you know?"
Yeah. No way to plan for that.
No, but no crystal balls were available at the moment when
Yeah.
we had that. But so,
But God really provided
yeah,
through that time of just you being diligent, taking responsibility as a husband, as a father,
mhm,
to say, you know what, no matter what it takes, I'm going to supply for my family and make sure that everything is covered. And that's, I mean, that's super honorable.
yeah, and it was difficult to make that decision just because I knew the amount of stress that put on all of us. It wasn't just that I
Yeah.
had to take the brunt of this. I don't feel like I had to take the brunt of it because Desiree was at home with the kids all
Yeah.
day. Like, and it was
Yeah,
all
that's
day.
tiring.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe even more tiring.
Probably because at least I had adults who talk and she had
And
babies that
listen.
screamed. Yeah. So, but
So you've been through a lot of different struggles, just from physical things changing. How would you say uh, are ways that you've kind of struggled in your faith as a machinist? What are some of those ways that have been kind of challenging, to keep the faith, or either to keep moving on in the faith?
hmm um, anywhere you would work, there's always going to be a dynamic of you're around these people who you spend a lot of time with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, I was just trying to do the math and I kind of gave up. I was like, how much time do I spend with people at work and how much time do I spend with just my family at home is kind of scary when you think about that. Just the
Yeah.
lack of time you actually have at home
Mm-hmm.
kind of makes you feel a little guilty at times too for not balancing that right. But to be around a group of guys who are great to be with, as far as just work, get it done, and have that kind of a mentality,
Mm-hmm.
is definitely good and helpful and encouraging. But there was maybe not an encouragement in my faith in that type of an atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not a job that you get to work and you all pray together,
Mm-hmm.
and do a group activity like that. It's you come there to work, and that's what the job is.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, you're expected to go there, work hard, get your job done, and
right,
leave. And it's not a spiritually driven job. It's not a
right. I'm not
spiritually
working
driven
in a
workplace.
ministry
Yeah,
position
yeah,
or anything like that. Like,
which is a lot of people. Yeah,
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 yeah. I would say the majority of people.
yeah, yeah.
But there's definitely a trap you can get in your mind in working in an atmosphere like that where there's a huge spectrum of different people
Mhm,
around you, where you can get complacent with yourself
mhm.
in that you're comparing yourself to other people, and you you trick yourself into thinking you're doing good because I'm not like this person,
Mhm.
or I don't have this issue in my life, so I guess I'm okay, or I'm better than that at least.
Yeah.
And you can get complacent. Yeah.
You're just
And
kind of taking the Christian ideas of, okay, I'm not cursing like they are, or I'm
right,
not doing
right.
these. I should be okay. I'm doing
hmm
pretty
hmm
good here.
Yeah. And that was a big one too, is just not talking a certain way was just a huge marker right off the bat. It was not weeks even. It was probably a week and somebody already made comments like, "Oh, you don't curse very much. Is there a reason for that?" Like, it's
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, I prefer not to."
Uh huh.
It's just kind of how I was raised.
Uh huh.
Um, and then it's interesting, people tend to try to they feel awkward around you when you don't talk in a similar way,
Yeah.
and I almost feel bad for them because I feel like I'm not intentionally trying to make you feel bad. This is just how I
Mhm.
talk and how I was raised to talk.
Yeah.
um, but it definitely sets you apart, and then it gives you opportunities to talk about it too and just share a little bit, about why you don't talk that way.
Now, I've noticed when I was in the plumbing field, especially coming out of working, in mostly Christian environments, whether it was a
hmm
theater I worked at, or a Mennonite owned, or Christian owned grocery store, uh, I had to actually start to, um, confront with myself why I wasn't doing those things, other than because I just don't do that because I was raised. Um, how is that kind of, have you had that similar experience that you've been like, huh, maybe I have to rethink why I'm not doing these, or why I'm not saying these stuff?
Sure. Yeah. Like there's definitely that moment of there's the moments of like you were raised in the church and I couldn't tell you when I was saved. Like
Uh-huh.
I could tell you when I've made multiple different conscious efforts
Mm-hmm.
to decide to make sure that I'm doing what
Yeah.
I
Kind
what
of deep in your faith.
right to
Yeah.
deepen that faith. Um but
The moment you started to believe, like, you just always knew about it.
right, you always knew about it, and then you always knew it wasn't good to behave or act or talk about things in certain ways that, I wouldn't say are God honoring, but
Mm-hmm.
it's it was a decision definitely to I can remember, and this, I think it was even before I was married. It was just a decision like, I don't feel like I need to do this just to fit in,
Yeah.
to act this way, because I know I could fit in more if I acted this way, but I had to find that, or I had to decide in that I was actively going to not do that. Um, and, and just that I didn't want to compromise that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
not an easy thing to do. And I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of ways in each person's field where they can say, this is how me in this place, I can practice my faith in this place.
Hmm.
How would you say are different ways as a machinist? Like obviously you testing metal, um, probably
For the
sometimes
glory
can,
of God.
yeah, for the
Yeah.
glory of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it can be tedious, I'm sure.
Sure.
And there's different ways that you can, uh, you know, like you said, through your actions of not saying certain things and probably not participating in different conversations. But what are ways like in your work ethic that you feel like have stood out, or what are ways um,
Hmm.
in just the way you conduct your personality
Yeah.
that have caused people to notice something different?
An early on experience that I know stood out and kind of, I remember just because it was interesting when it happened.
Hmm.
I just never forgot about it. Was just when I started the job there. I was young, 19 years old, but I had 3 years of experience at a Votex center where they taught me very well. Like I feel like I gained a lot of knowledge going to that school. It
Hmm.
was very applicable in a lot of the different aspects of what I did as a machinist at Carpenter.
Hmm.
Um, it put me in a position where I came in knowing stuff that not everybody came in knowing,
Yep.
but I didn't have to act like I knew it.
Yep.
And I think part of my personality is a little more laid back where I'm okay hearing somebody explain to me something that I already know.
Hmm.
And it would happen. There was one guy who he was the one instance I can definitely remember this. The first time was learning the one piece of machinery.
Hmm.
Um, his name was Ant. We called him Ant. At least his name was Anthony.
Yeah.
But he showed me the machine. He was going over all the processes of how he does it, and he was a very meticulous person. So he was very specific on how he was explaining it, and I just definitely I probably was taking notes and listening to what he was saying. I wasn't really interrupting him. I was maybe asking important questions then after just to make sure I understood. But
Hmm.
he made the comment to me after that, like, um, thanks for like listening and not like blowing me off or not just acting like you already knew everything, because it was very soon after that that he realized that I did know a lot about machining,
Yeah.
but I didn't have to tell him that, or I didn't have to act like I knew everything already.
Hmm.
He kind of just realized it and was appreciative that I didn't act so proud about it or so know it all kind
Yeah.
of an
Yeah.
attitude. Like I
For
didn't
sure.
have that. And I know that that's one thing I always looked to my dad as an example of, was just how I think that he's got a good humility, uh, or he exhibits a lot of humility in his personality.
For sure.
And my grandfather was the same way. And I remember I wanted to emulate that, um, and just be kind of, just to have that humility as a part of my character.
Yeah. For sure.
um, so I think that that stood out in that instance at work, um, and others like it too, because then I can recall experiencing teaching somebody who did act like they knew it all, and
Yeah.
that doesn't feel good, you know.
Yeah. For sure.
um, so I can see how it would be nice to not experience that if you had previously. So, and that's not like I was being humble. It's like thinking about it now afterwards. I can be like,
Hmm.
I feel like it was just a moment of just being a little more humble, but not like an active thing that I was doing.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like trying to do it so that I could convince somebody of some greater master plan or something. It
Yeah.
was just acting that way because that's how I was raised, like giving a little credit to that,
Yeah.
where yeah, I wasn't trying to prove anything in that moment.
Uh-huh. And I think that some of the things of how we live in our lives, like that's a testament of God being in your life from a young age, of just having that those instilled humility, that instilled
Mhm.
just care for people and not trying to make fun of people. Because I think sometimes you can think of, oh, he doesn't curse, but he also doesn't throw me under the bus. He
Right.
doesn't try to make fun of me in front of everybody. He doesn't talk about women that way.
Mhm.
And there's things that we can do as even as people, but as men specifically, in honoring women and honoring the people around us, that can make a huge difference in uh, and I think what you could eventually see is that it might not impact them at that moment, but it impacts them later when they realize kind of, oh, when they're going through something and they need someone to turn to,
Mhm.
they know that you care, and they know that
Right.
there's this humility and there's this genuineness to you. And I've
Yep.
seen that in a lot of different ways in your life, that you're a person that people can come to. They know they're not going to get screamed at. They know they're not going to be beat down, but they're going to be encouraged. And so
Yeah.
I think that's really, really cool. And Jake does a lot more, like I was saying earlier, than just break metal
Yeah.
and test metal.
Yeah.
He's a dad. He's a husband. He's got a lot of hobbies. You got. Tell us about some of the animals you got. He's been raising a bunch of different
Oh,
animals.
different animals. I always wanted a dog
Mm-hmm.
growing up. Never was able to, even though we grew up on a farm where we just happened to not be allowed to have dogs on that farm.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got out of the house, moved out into my first house, I was engaged at the time,
Uh-huh.
and Desiree and I had talked about getting a dog, but I did not act very well. And there's conversations that we've had still where it's talking about this, that I didn't really consult her fully.
Yeah.
I thought I consulted her fully,
Yeah.
but I chose the dog. And
Yeah.
it kind of led to a little bit of a tension there, or a little bit of tension.
Yeah.
So so that first experience wasn't a great one in that sense. Now, granted, Desiree definitely enjoyed the dog after we got it and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It was fine, ultimately, but there was that it didn't step off on the right foot.
Yep.
But I had that. I had a dog now. It was a great experience.
Yeah.
I was able to anything that I've got as hobbies or interests, I find myself diving into deeply
Uh-huh.
and almost obsessively. And
Yeah.
maybe that's not totally healthy either, but at least I know that I'm trying to educate myself on the right way to do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So you're not harming the animals or being
yeah, and
unethical. Or...
right, and that I'm also learning how to train a dog or how to care for them properly. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
Started with the dog.
started with the dog. Then we had 2 dogs. Then we had 3 dogs. Then we had an unfortunate circumstance where we had to surrender these 3 dogs.
Yeah, that was really.
That was a rough and very difficult decision.
Mm-hmm.
That was a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, we have moved from where we were, where that was related to why we had to surrender the dog, or dogs. But now living, we have another dog. She's 2 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also our children grew a little more, and they showed interest in certain animals. Elizabeth, my oldest, liked snakes, liked reptiles, and we took them to a couple of zoos. We took them to a Reptiland, or it was called Clyde Peely's Reptiland. And that's up north here. It's like an hour and a half away. But that was kind of the first instance of like showing her that, and then just experiencing it myself, which is very interesting. But it didn't really click in any way necessarily for myself at the time. Then we were offered a snake as a pet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a free thing where, hey, I need to rehome this. Would you be interested?
Mm-hmm.
And right away, Desiree thought of, well, Elizabeth really likes snakes. So,
Yeah.
and it was through a friend of Desiree. But he offered it to us if we were interested in taking it and caring for it. So we took the snake. He offered us two. And at the time I said, no, I'm okay with one snake.
Yeah.
But I did dive into understanding the snake and the species and all about the care and the husbandry. And then I realized that there was a whole world of reptiles that is out there that is kind of not really talked about and not really
Yeah.
known that much about. But fast forward to today, we have 17 snakes in our house now.
Dang.
So yeah. And I'm actively breeding them as a hobby and breeding them for different specific traits. And yeah, so that's been an interest that's gone as far as to where it's now its own little side business that I've kind of started.
Mm-hmm.
We call it the Ophidiarium is the name
Mm-hmm.
of it. So
Yeah.
there's a whole new thing with learning that, but getting involved in some of that community has been interesting too, because a lot of people in that industry or in that hobby,
Mm-hmm.
not even the industry side of it, but just keeping it. You think about snakes and reptiles, and people kind of get like heebie-jeebies about it,
Yeah.
and people more than once will tell you that, oh, snakes are evil. I just feel like snakes are evil, and that's an
Yeah.
interesting conversation to have with people.
Yeah.
But to be in that community has been interesting, and just learning that there's a whole spectrum of people in that too, where there's definitely opportunities to share my faith in that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the thought goes through my head, do you want to be like a tract guy who hands out a tract with every snake that you sell? Or
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
no, I don't think that's not necessarily me. So I wouldn't do that, but there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely opportunities to hang out with people and talk with people who might never be in any conversation with a church. They would never go to a church
Yeah.
or talk with anybody about that type of stuff, because they feel ostracized for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
for their interest in what they are interested in. But that's been the most active currently hobby that I've been in, where it's grown to the state it's in right now. But there's other hobbies too. I had bees for a short amount of time, which you can relate to because you
Yeah. I
had
kept
them
bees for a
before
little bit.
me.
Yeah.
But that was interesting. Still not been very successful for me,
Yeah.
but still looking to do that in the future here next year and next spring. Try it again.
Chickens.
Ducks. Yep. And that, for whatever reason, my interest in different animal hobbies is mostly what it seems to center around, but they all tend to be with breeding and that whole aspect, not just keeping, but breeding and furthering and procreating from that, which I don't know what drives that, but it's any of the ducks we've had. Okay, the
Mm-hmm.
ducks I haven't bred, but the chickens I've hatched out multiple
Mm-hmm.
clutches of those. The bees, obviously they procreate by themselves, but keep
Yeah.
them and help them, assist them. But for whatever reason, there's been an interest in breeding them. Like even the dog, like I've thought about it, but I haven't made that decision yet
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, and something that I see in you with all these things, Jake, is that you're someone who is passionate and you're someone who follows through. And I
mm,
think that's really fun to see, that there's a lot of people out there, who need that push to follow through and to kind of go after their passions. And sometimes it's a
no,
side thing, sometimes it's your main thing.
yeah,
Um, and you're probably a little more passionate about snakes than you are about steel,
yeah,
but at the same time, you're providing for your family and you're using all these different avenues as ways to be a steady person. And I know you to be a steady person and to be someone who doesn't isn't wishy-washy. I wish I had kind of the steady faith that you do, and just the way you lead your small group,
Hmm.
the way you lead your family. You're always trying to be a man that's consistent, steady, and but also someone who is uh, intentional with the things that you do. So that's been really fun to see and to be a part of your life in those ways, and to kind of get from you. Like, even I've had really bad days and I'm at your small group and I've just been there till like almost midnight, and you got to get
Yeah.
up at like 5
Yeah.
in the morning,
Yeah.
and you're just so gracious to just like let me just spew out my like
Yeah.
my hard times. And that's something that I think is really amazing about you, and just that you have the ability um, to just be that steady person. And yeah, that's one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on here, and I'm really glad for the conversation that we've been able to have
Sure.
about all things J. Cole,
Yeah.
and not J. Cole like the rapper, Jake Cole.
Yeah.
Like,
Not Jake Cole.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh man.
There's so many names.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, this has been great. There's a couple questions I like to ask every single guest.
Sure.
The one is going to be, what is a quote, or not a quote, but what's some advice that you've been given, whether it's been by a mentor, by a speaker, or just from like a book or
Hmm.
that type of thing, that has kind of followed you through for a while. And then the second question I'll be asking you is, how can people kind of follow along with what you're doing?
Sure.
With yeah.
Well, I guess one thing that's definitely always kind of I've appreciated when it was said, because it was necessary when it was said to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of stuck with me and comes back now and then when it's necessary.
Yeah.
I can remember my dad having conversations with him as I was getting to that point where I was almost moved out of the house. Like, I was graduated, I was going to a work that was a full-time job, a big grown-up boy job.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just remember asking questions that were like very like, how do I know what I'm going to do is the right thing? How do I know I'm going the right way? How do I
Mm-hmm.
know this is the path God wants me to go down? And he kind of said, I'm gonna have to paraphrase because I don't recall it
Yeah.
exactly, but
Yep.
he kind of said that God gives us the opportunity to make decisions. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay if you make a decision, and he's going to it's it's okay if you make a decision, because you can make a decision to go this way and this way, and they can both be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was relieving, because it was almost
Yeah.
like there was very big things in my life at the time where like I didn't know if this was right or wrong way to go. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you feel like sometimes you can fall into that, or being raised in a church where there's a left and a right and there's nowhere in between that you can go. But
Yep.
no, that's okay. Sometimes you can have decisions and God can bless either decision you make. Like,
Yeah.
he gives you that freedom sometimes to make those decisions. And there's times in my life where that's been an applicable lesson to make a decision and be okay with that decision, and not feel like, oh, I might be making the wrong decision right now. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. But it's that freedom to just kind of make a decision and go with it, and pray about it, obviously, but
Yeah.
before you make it, but not feel so cornered in and pigeonholed that you have to make the right decision.
Yeah.
So that was something that definitely sticks with me.
That's really good. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
And that could be a whole nother podcast. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
And then what are ways, obviously, Carpenter is a big company. People watching this probably won't be needing steel, but how can people follow along with your journey with your snakes and with your reptiles and the different breeding and stuff?
Sure. Yeah. I have Facebook, so there's personal Facebook there, but as well as I do have a page for just our business that we're doing now with the reptiles, which is the Ophidiarium, on Instagram, as well as the Ophidiarium.
Yep. And we'll post the links in the comment or in the description.
Yep. So you can follow along with any of that cool stuff. I try to post frequently and just fun things about it, and just kind of Sometimes it's educational. Sometimes it's just a picture of a snake. Sometimes it's a
Yeah.
video of a snake with music to it, you know. So
Sometimes it's your kids.
yeah,
with
sometimes it's
them.
my kids with them, or yeah, or the chickens, or whatever get thrown in there sometimes too.
Yeah.
So
That's a lot of fun.
yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining, Jake. This has been such a good time. And yeah, I'll see you on Sunday.